If you love drawing flowers as much as I do, this is the video for you. We're going to work through 12 floral doodles that you need to know and that I know you can master. So let's get started. Hi friends, welcome back. My name is Shada. Today we are going to draw 12 flowers. I know you can get the hang of all of these, so let's just jump right in. The first one is a chamomile flower. It sort of looks like a daisy or a black-eyed Susan. We start with a semicircle there, and then I do a couple lines, and I follow those lines as I draw these sort of raggedy petals. Each petal's a different size and a slightly different shape. And you can do these on an angle. You can certainly add 2 or 3, but they all follow the same formula. Let's go over it in pen so you can really see those 5 little lines coming out there in that semicircle. And then you just go around those lines and draw these petal shapes. And each petal can be a little different, a little bit of line shading there. Helps to show the shape of the petals. And for the second one, it's that semicircle. I kind of make it a little bit lumpy. And then of course those petals, and you can add as many as you like, a little bit of line shading. And I just do a sort of scraggly leaf. And then for the large stamen, that semicircle, you want to do a little bit of stippling. I'm doing some dots and some curving lines and some scribbling just to add a little bit of contrast. We've got the white petals and the darker stamen in the center, and that's all there is to it. Some of you may find that this tutorial moves too quickly, and for that reason I've created floral worksheets, and you can grab those over on my Patreon site after today's video. Okay, so next we're doing hibiscus, and I start with a circle. It's my guide. It shows me where the flower is, and then a circle in the center marks the center of the flower. You guys know this. And I am doing these petal shapes, and we just move out, and we're going to do 5 petals, and I sort of work them out in pencil first, making sure that I can indeed fit 5 petals there, and each one overlaps the one before it. So we've got 5 petal shapes, and then I'm going to erase the center, and I'm going to draw the stamen, which is a curving line and with a few little bumps on the end. Very simple. I'll go over it in pen so you can really see it. So we've got these 5 petal shapes, each one overlapping the next, and I'm avoiding the center of the flower where the stamen is. And then next, of course, we will draw that stamen in. It's just a simple line with those little bumpy bits on top, curving line. And then this is where the hibiscus really comes together. You want to add some dark line shading all around that stamen so that you can really see it. First of all, you see that center by creating the contrast. And it also helps to create a bit of depth. It shows that the flower is receding in the center. A few more lines on the petals give those petals a bit more shape and texture, and then you're all done. Our next flower is one of my favorites, the Gladiola. So we start with a line, just a vertical line, and then we do these little oval shapes, little buds at the top. And then we start marking where the flowers will be, and they get larger as we move down that line, down the stem. So just place some circles there. The ones at the top near the buds are sort of half open. And then we draw some little semicircles towards the bottom. Make the edges of our circular flowers a little more ruffled, and that's all there is to it. Let's go over it in pen. So we've got the stem and these little tear-shaped or oval-shaped buds at the top. The stem is dark, it's black, the flowers are white. And we'll do these tiny little flowers at the top. They're sort of just random shapes with a nice ruffled edge. And then as we go down, we get these larger circular flowers. But of course, the edges of the circle are ruffled. Then a little semicircle towards the bottom, a little curving line towards the bottom. And then this little bit of line shading shows how the flower is opening up. And the flowers on the left-hand side go out towards the left side of the page, and the flowers on the right open up towards the right-hand side of the page. Add a little more line shading to show the depth in each bloom, and you're all done. Next, we're drawing a very popular flower whose name I can never say, and that's the Annome. We'll start with a circle as your guide so you know where you're placing it. Another circle to mark center. And then we do these petals, so start with the top and the bottom. Don't worry too much about the shape, and then do the sides. And then we're going to fill in 4 more, sort of peeking out in the corners there. And you might add another 1 or 2 along the bottom. And then we'll start to add more detail, maybe a leaf or 2. And we'll go over it in pen so you can really see the detail here. The stamen in the center is circular. And I always sort of scribble it in so it's not too dark. And then we do all these little lines moving outward from center. And we top those lines with a bunch of little dots. The anemone has this wonderfully detailed stamen that is just so much fun to illustrate. Then as we go over these petals, we're going to give them a little more shape. You don't want them to be too round. Wiggle that pen a little bit, make them a little bit broken, a little bit wonky, and just make sure that the petals are not too smooth. Otherwise it looks almost cartoon-like. So you want this very perfectly imperfect petal and leaf shape, and that I think is what brings the flower to life. Now I'm coming back in with a smaller fine liner and doing just a bit of line shading. These lines move out from the center and they follow the shape of the petal. I'm using 2 fine liners today for all of my outlines or contour drawings. I am using the Pigma Micron 05, and for all the line shading, the Pigma Micron 01, the smaller nib. Next we'll draw rose hips. Now technically they're not a flower, but they are part of the rose, and I love adding berries as part of my floral designs. So start with some oval shapes. You can group them or they can all be separate, and then we'll join them together with a few branches, a few lines. And we'll add some leaves. These are sort of a pointed oval shape for the leaves. You can do as many as you like. And we'll go over this in pen. So surround those ovals. They don't need to be perfect. We'll go over the branches. For these little nubby bits at the top of the berry, you just want to do some vertical lines. I'll start sometimes with a curved line and then some vertical lines, but even a dot will work there, 1 dot. And for the leaves, I am adding some toothy edges. So I'm using my pencil ovals as a guide, and I'm just going around and adding the little teeth, and then I'll add some lines as well. But all of that is optional. You don't need to get this detailed. And I think I'll finish it with just a little bit of line shading on the side of each rose hip of each berry. Here's another favorite flower of mine, the lilac. So I am starting with a curving line. This is a guide to help you draw the flower. And then we're going to do this sort of drooping conical shape. Again, it's part of the guide to help you know where to draw everything. You can add a leaf shape or 2. Then we go up to the top of this cone shape and we do some little ovals, and then those ovals slowly morph into tiny little blossoms, little 4-petal flowers. And I'm just sort of going over the shape of the leaves here and working out the shape of the lilac. I'll go over everything in pen so you can really see the top little blossoms are just little oval shapes, and they give way to tiny 4-petal flowers. And then these little 4-petal flowers get larger. Of course, not everything needs to be a full flower. You can do just some little ovals, some little broken flowers. You can abstract things slightly, and you want to make sure that the shape of this lilac is not too perfect. It shouldn't be this perfect oval shape. It should be a little wonky, a little unbalanced, because that's the way things are in nature. So anything too perfect or too round can look cartoon-like and not very realistic. So I'm working on messing up the shape a little bit. I've done the leaves here. I'm just going to add a tiny bit of line shading to them. And then if you want to be really extra, you can add a tiny bit of line shading at the center of some of those little blossoms. And that will just help bring the lilac to life and give it that little bit of extra contrast and oomph. Next, let's draw poppies. So they are similar to the anemone in that they have a large stamen and big petals, but they lack that structure. They're a little floppier, and so I want to show that. I'm starting by drawing 1 poppy on an angle with just the big floppy petals. And then the next one, we're going to start by drawing a guide. We do a circle and we mark center, and where we mark that center affects the length of each petal. That front petal is very short. It's coming towards the viewer, so we can't see it in its entirety, and that helps with the depth and perspective. That's foreshortening. Let's go over this in pen and we'll talk about it some more. We've got 1 poppy with its big floppy petals sort of facing away from the viewer. It's on an angle. And I think that looks nice. Add a bit of line shading. And then this next one, we've done a circle. Then we mark center, and that center is close to one side of the circle, which means that these petals on the other side are quite large and the ones on this front side are quite small. And that really is all about the foreshortening, and it adds that wonderful perspective that makes our flowers look more realistic. And we'll talk about that a bit more when we draw our buttercups, but for now, let's draw a calla lily. So I start with a U. Do this in pencil, a U shape. Then you're going to drop down to one side and you're going to make this big swooping shape go up and around, and you can do it a bunch of times to rework it and make sure you get this shape looking just the way you want it. And then you're going to thicken these front bits a little bit. And then we put that little stamen in the center, stem with maybe 1 or 2 leaves, and let's go over it in pen. The U shape at the bottom and then up and around, and then we want to thicken these bits at the front, so we'll add an extra line there, the stamen in the center, and then just a simple curving stem and 1 or 2 leaves, and my leaves are just very nondescript. To add a bit of contrast, I'll add line shading to those leaves, so I'm not coloring them in dark black, I'm just adding some lines. And then on the flower, we'll add just a touch of line shading. The calla lily is that beautiful white, so we don't want to color it in too much. A marigold is our next flower, and this one starts again with a pencil guide. Draw your circle, and then you're going to do a little circle towards the top of that circle, and then you're going to do these rings going outward. But of course the rings eventually can only be sort of semicircles towards the bottom here. Then still working in pencil, we're going to start doing these shaggy, ruffled little petal shapes. And we use those rings that we laid down to help guide us. That's why we call it our guide. And we're going to use them to just help you know where to place those petals. You'll see that I stopped using my rings. Maybe my rings were a little too large, and I'm sort of feeling that now. And that's totally fine. I can rework this as I go. And that's again why we are doing it in pencil first, because this is quite a detailed flower, but I think when it comes together, it just has this wonderful, cheerful look. The marigold is big and shaggy and has all these tiny little petals with their ruffled edges. So I'll start going over it in pen with my 05 Pigmamicron fine liner. And I'm just going around and around. Eventually I get to a point where I've got so many pencil lines and so many pen lines that I want to just get rid of all that pencil. Then I'll come back in again with pencil and figure out where do I need a couple more petals to finish off that circle. I'm doing the leaves here, and I want to sort of tuck them in behind the big flower, the big blossom, and then of course I'll finish it in pen. But this marigold, I think it looks quite complicated, or it looks quite detailed, but it's actually so much fun to draw, especially if you start with that guide in pencil. I'll add some line shading to the leaves to darken them, to create that contrast between leaf and flower, and then a lot of little line shading on those petals, just following the direction of the petals. It goes a long way, and it really makes that flower pop. Next, we're going to work through our perspective again, and we're going to draw buttercups. So I'll start with a circle, you guessed it, a couple circles actually, these look good in groups. And then you're going to mark your center. And for this top one, I'm going to put the center right in the middle. And so that means this will be quite a flat buttercup. All the petals are the same size. And for this other one though, I'm going to place the center towards the bottom of that circle. And that means these back petals are large, while the front one is quite short, because again, it's shortened because it's coming towards our viewer. When things either come towards us or recede away from us, the eye doesn't perceive them in the same way. So we have to capture that on the page when we're illustrating. I'm decided to redo this one and do 5 petals instead of 4, but the petal shapes, just make sure that they're not too smooth. You want to give them a little bit of that wonkiness to make them look more realistic. And here on the front one, you can see that I've really shortened up those front petals, and the stamen is just these vertical lines in a circle shape. And then I decided I'd like to add one more, so let's go through it again. Start with the circle, mark your center. This is another flat one just coming face on towards our viewer, 5 petals, 4 or 5 petals, and then the stamen is these vertical lines around a circle. We'll lengthen those stems, we'll add a little bit of line shading, and those are our buttercups. You can also add some leaves if you like. Pretty much the same drill for the leaves. I start with a guide, just drawing in the oval leaf shape in pencil, and then when I go around, I can add a bit of a toothy edge to those leaves and, additional details when I work on it in pen. So always start in pencil and set yourself up for success. If you're following along, we've now done 10 flowers and we only have 2 to go. Our 11th flower is Foxglove. This one we start with a vertical stem and these little teardrop shapes at the top, and then the teardrops get larger and larger and more multiple as we go down the length of that stem. So everything gets a bit wider, the flower really fills in. You might add a leaf or 2, but towards the top the teardrop shapes are tiny. These are just the little buds, and then the blossoms get larger and they sort of droop down and they hang in big clusters or groups. Like all the flowers, you want to wiggle that pen a little so that the edges of the blossom are not too smooth. They should be a little bit weird, and 1 or 2 might have a little stem there just to show the shape of the flower or how the flower comes together. I'm going to tuck 1 long oval-shaped leaf in behind, and then we're going to add some details. The blossoms of the foxglove are a conical shape, and so we want to show that. So I'm adding these tiny curving lines. They're sort of upside down, and then we add a bunch of line shading coming out from each curving line. And that's just to give these blossoms a little bit of depth and show that cone shape. We don't want to get too detailed or too realistic about it because this is just a little doodle, but that's one way that you can capture the simple cone shape of each blossom without making the flower too complicated. I'm darkening the stem and all the leafy areas to give me a nice contrast, a bit of line shading on the leaf and a bit more line shading on each of those cone-shaped blossoms, and then we are all done. Okay, last flower. I had to do a rose, right? So that's our final one. We start with a circle, it's a guide. Then you're gonna mark center. And I always do a few dots and circles for the center stamen. Then we do these broken curving lines surrounding the center. And then as we move outward, those curving lines turn into small petals, maybe 3 or 4. And then we move out and we add another circle of petals or another ring of petals. You don't need these petal shapes to be symmetrical. One side could have a few extras. Let's go over it in pen so you can really see. So the dots in the center are little circles in the center, and they're surrounded by semicircular lines that are sort of broken and curving. And then those lines slowly give way to larger petal shapes. There might be 3 or 4 around the center. And then from there, we keep adding these petal shapes. And I wiggle that pen, I shake the pen a little so that they don't look too perfect. And we just keep moving outward, making the petals a little larger and larger. And at a certain point, you have to just say, okay, I'm gonna stop it there. And we can add a little bit of line shading. Of course, we'll get rid of all our pencil marks, and then we can continue with the line shading. So I just do these little broken lines where the petals meet one another. It gives me a bit of depth. And then I want to add the leaves of the rose, and I'll do that by simply drawing them in pencil first, so I'm sure that I like where they're placed. I like the placement. And then of course I can add a toothy perimeter to each leaf. I always like to draw the oval shape first, and then when I go over it in pen, I add that scalloped edge. And of course you can still do that in pencil. There's nothing wrong with doing everything in pencil first before you go over it in that pen. We'll add some veining lines to each of the leaves, and then I'll grab my smaller Pigmamicron, the 01 nib, and I'll continue with the line shading, adding a bit more texture to some of these petals, and I might darken one side of some of the leaves. That just adds a bit of depth and contrast as well. And then that's it, we're all done. This is 12 flower doodles that I know you can master. Follow along with today's video. You can always pause, slow the video down if you need to, and definitely head over to my Patreon site to grab those worksheets. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you soon with a new tutorial.